In this video, I'm going to cover NES Emulation in the PC version of Retroarch. It honestly doesn't get any more iconic than the original Nintendo Entertainment System. The system is host to a number of classic games that are still great to play even today. That being said, there are a number of ways to emulate NES games, and not all of them are as good as others, but, there's so many great, accurate NES emulators out there these days, it's fantastic. That being said, this tutorial is going to cover NES emulation on the PC version of Retroarch using the Nestopia UE core. So let's dive in. The first step to getting NES games up and running in the PC version of Retroarch is to install Retroarch. Now, this video is a continuation of my original how to install Retroarch for your Windows 10 PC tutorial that can be found on my channel or in the link in the description below or top right hand corner of the screen. The next thing we're going to need are NES games, and there's a number of ways to get these days. You can dump them from your physical collection with a hardware dumper, you can rip them from the virtual consoles if you have a modded Wii or Wii U, or you can resort to the shady parts of the net. I really don't give a crap how you get your NES games, but don't ask for illegal download links because I will not provide them. That risks my channel, and if y'all think I'm dumb enough to do that, well, you have another thing coming. But once you have your NES games sourced, they can go literally anywhere on your computer where you store your games. Like, I'm sure you have directories set up that you like to use. If not, just create one and just start using that. For this tutorial series, I made a folder within my Retroarch PC tutorial folder named Retroarch Games, and this is where I'm just going to be storing all the games for my tutorial series. Again, your games could go anywhere. They don't have to go in a folder like this. They just put them wherever you want. But once you have your games where you want them and you have Retroarch up and running, we can boot into Retroarch and get our NES core downloaded and set up. Once Retroarch is booted up, head into the online updater, core downloader, and press the right arrow key on your keyboard to go down to the Nintendo section. And we are looking for Nintendo NES/Famicom Nestopia UE, and press enter to download it. Once it's downloaded, we're free to begin loading up NES content, and one of the ways to do so is to go to the Load Content button here. And then we could just navigate to where we have our NES games stored. So for example, on the desktop, you'd go See Users, User Profile, Desktop, and then find the folder with the NES games, select a game, tell it which core to run, and you're up and running. I don't like this method personally, so what I like to do instead is press F5 on my keyboard to bring up the Retroarch desktop menu. And when the desktop menu pops up, it says, hey, welcome to the desktop menu, where it's like, hey, thanks, go away. But over on the left-hand side of the desktop menu, there is a playlist content browser right here. And this is where we're going to make our new NES games playlist. So we can right-click here, new playlist, type in Nintendo, space, Nintendo Entertainment System, and press enter. And that gives us a nice Nintendo Famicom playlist entry here on the left. So select that, and then in the main box here, right-click and tell it to add a folder. And we just need to find our NES games once again. And tell it to select the folder. For core, it's going to ask us which core we're using, so choose Nestopia. And database, Nintendo Entertainment System. And press OK once you have those set. And it should pop up all of your NES games. Now there is one more optional step we could do here to make our playlist look a little bit better, and that is to right-click on the Nintendo Entertainment System playlist entry here, and we could tell it to download thumbnails for the playlist. And it will look through the games that you have and try to download thumbnails for them. It is looking for specific naming requirements to get these to show up. Typically it's just the game name followed by a region code. So as you can see, it found some and it failed to find some for me. So for example, Super Mario Bros. 2, it didn't find for me, and I think it's because they say Rev A on them. So if I go in and edit these and delete the Rev A, I can tell it to re-download the thumbnails, and this time it was able to find it. So I'm going to do the same thing to Mario Bros. 3. Alternatively, you can manually download box arts and then just drag them into the box art window here, and it should set them automatically. Now, just a quick note for those of you that want to do Famicom Disk System stuff, you will need a Famicom Disk System BIOS named disksys.rom. I don't have a Famicom disk system, so I don't ever set this up, but if you want to use it, you just need to get that BIOS file, and then you would place it inside your RetroArch system folder right here. Again, I don't have a Famicom disk system BIOS, so that's not something I'm specifically covering in this tutorial. But once you have your playlist made, we could go ahead and exit out of the RetroArch desktop menu, and then we could go ahead and full screen back up RetroArch here with the F key on our keyboard. And then from here, just back out to your main menu if you were somewhere else, that is. Because we need to restart RetroArch in order for our NES playlist to show up, so I'm just going to tell it to restart. And there we go, Nintendo Entertainment System playlist entry on the left-hand side of the screen. So to play a game, all you need to do is select the playlist, navigate to the game you want to play, look at all those wonderful box arts, and then tell it to run. And if you want to play with a controller, just make sure to plug one in, and RetroArch should be able to automatically detect most PC game controllers. So for example, I'm using the Xbox Series X controller and it's popping up just fine. But there we go, now we can begin playing our NES games on the PC version of RetroArch. Friggin' sweet. Now I know what you're saying, that's great for controller games, but what about NES Zapper games? Well, you're in luck, those are perfectly emulatable within RetroArch as well. And thanks to the way that emulation works these days, the game automatically detects that it needs to be set to a Zapper. And as you can see, loading up Duck Hunt brings up a nice crosshair for us to use with our mouse on the computer. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work right off the bat. We do need to set an option in our RetroArch quick menu. So press F1 on your keyboard to bring up the RetroArch quick menu. And from here, we're going to find the options menu. So just go ahead and press enter here. And we're going to scroll down a little bit until we find the Zapper device. So by default, it is looking for an actual physical light gun, something like the Sinden light gun. But if you press enter on this, we could change it to a mouse. And then we could just press F1 on the keyboard to go back out. And now our mouse should behave as the NES Zapper, so we could just right click and start up the game. Or left click, rather. And there we go. Now we can play NES Zapper games on the PC using a mouse. It's kind of cheap. Like, look how easy that is. But hey, it lets you play these games, so whatever, it works. If you have a light gun setup, it's definitely a lot better, but whatever. It's expensive stuff. So for those of you looking to get NES games up and running on your PC, that is the basic process on how to get most everything playable. Just gotta get your games, load them up, and then you change a few settings to get light gun games to work. But let's go ahead and cover some of the more advanced core options available to us within the Nestopia UE core. So once again, pressing F1 on our keyboard will bring us to the RetroArch quick menu. And then from here, just navigate back down to options. And our first option is a Blarg NTSC filter, and I freaking love these things. So going into it, you can enable different filters to mimic different types of TV connections. For example, composite video. Look at that. S-video. There we go. RGB SCART. Hey, that looks familiar. Or even a black and white screen. Honestly, these are pretty cool, and I like to use them. Especially the RGB SCART one. I have an RGB modded top loader, so looks pretty reminiscent to what I have when I upscale it through an upscaling device. Next, we have a selectable palette. So the NES doesn't have an actual set color palette, and depending on the display that you hooked it up to, it would look different for different people. By default, it is set to the CXA 2025AS palette, and this one is probably my preferred, but you could change it to a bunch of different ones and see what you think. Definitely the ones I would recommend are any of the ones from Firebrand X here. So we have Composite Direct, PVM, NTSC, NES Classic, or if you want to insert your own custom palettes, there are instructions on how to do this on the RetroArch website. It's not something I'm going to cover in this tutorial. There we go. Just scroll through them, see which ones you like. Again, I prefer the CX personally. Our next option is to remove the sprite limit. So when there were more than 8 sprites per scan line, you would start to get flickering. As you can see here in Mega Man, things are starting to flicker. So we could turn off the sprite limit, and in theory, it should help reduce that. There we go. It just took it a while to load up, but as you can see, the life bar is no longer flickering. For authenticity's sake, I like to leave this disabled. Next, we have the CPU speed overclock, so you can overclock your emulated NES up to 2 times. This will help remove any hardware-based slowdown, make games run at faster frames. If you don't like the traditional slowdown that was present in NES games, go ahead and turn this on. Next is the 4-player adapter, so if you have a multiplayer-enabled NES game, you could use 4 controllers on Retroarch and play those games. Next, Famicom Disk System Auto Insert, leave this on. Next, we have a couple of overscan options, so NES games typically had garbage data at the top, bottom, left, or right side of the screen, and you can enable overscans to try to mask those if you want to get rid of them. Next, preferred aspect ratio. For this, I just like to set it to 4:3 personally. Games of this era were meant to be stretched to 4:3, so that's just what I prefer. Or, you know, you could have square pixels, or set it to PAL even. Whatever you prefer. Mess around with it, see what you think. But I personally like 4:3. Next, we have Game Genie sound distortion. So if you grew up playing your games with the Game Genie, the pass-through would actually cause some audio issues, so you can mimic those by turning this on or off here. Next, we have the system region, and by default this is set to auto, which should be great for 99.9% of use cases, but if for whatever reason you need to manually set this, you could do it here. This next option is pretty cool, but not one that most of you will be using. You can set the RAM power on state, and this lets you mess around with powering on your NES games with stuff already stored in RAM. This would cause various glitches or things to happen. So it can be pretty interesting to mess with. Again, I don't really recommend using this for the most part, just something fun to mess around with. Next, we have shift buttons clockwise. So by default, A is set to B, B is set to A on an Xbox controller, and then Y and X are the turbo buttons. But by enabling this option, it will set A to A and B to X, just to make it a little bit more comfortable to use, and then B and Y become your turbo buttons. I'm used to the way it is now, so I don't enable this, but if you need to, go for it. Next, we have our Archanoid device, and you can have this set to mouse, so that way you can use your computer mouse to move the Archanoid pad. And then again, Zapper device, we already covered that a little bit earlier. And then we have show crosshairs, so that was the crosshair that was showing up when we were playing Duck Hunt. And then turbo pulse speed, so this adjusts how fast your turbo button is, up to 9. It's fine for me on 2, personally, but mess around with it, see what you need. And then finally we have the advanced audio settings. So to get these to show up, you just press, and you just enable these. Then you press F1 on your keyboard to leave the quick menu, and press F1 to come back in. And you can modify all of the different audio channels that are available. This is a little bit beyond my scope. I'm not much of an NES audiophile, but the options are here if you want to mess with them. But I'm just going to go ahead and close back out of this. There we go. And that's going to do it as far as the core options are concerned. Now, if there are per game options you want to set, you could go into Manage Core Options, and you could save the game option file per game. Alternatively, you can save an entire core override by going into the Overrides tab here, and then saving the core override, so that way every time you load up an NES game, these are the options that greet you. But that's going to do it for NES emulation using the Nestopia UE core in the PC version of Retroarch. Again, initial setup isn't too complicated, and we do get a number of fun little core options to mess around with. As always, if you happen to have any questions, feel free to ask me down in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to try to help you out. But now if you could all do me a huge favor, and be sure to hit that like or dislike button, just depending on how much you like today's tutorial. And if you haven't done so already, please be sure to hit that sub button so you can see when new videos like this, or reviews, or other random nonsense I like to post to my channel goes live. Goes a long way to helping us out and keeping the place growing. And thanks to all of you, we are just so super close to hitting all of our goals, and we just are so grateful to all of you for that. If you'd like to further help support the channel, be sure to check out that join button here on YouTube, or check out the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen as well. A little really goes a long way to keeping the place up and running, and we are just super grateful to everyone who has done so. Champions, you are our rock stars, you're amazing, thank you so much. But that's gonna do it for this one, so until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, stay awesome, and we will see you all back next video.